In this lesson, we're going to use the Python templating language Jinja 2 to create reusable HTML templates. We'll also be implementing the Bootstrap CSS framework to create a base layout of our application. If you aren't familiar with Jinja or templating languages in general, I'll briefly discuss what they are and how they are used. Using our Hello World view, we've seen how, when given an HTTP request, we are able to return text responses. Using that same logic, we are going to take an HTTP request and return rendered HTML. Templating languages like Jinja allow us to take data from our server-side code, like our views, and use that data to render client-side code, like HTML, and return it to the user. The user's browser then renders that HTML for them to view. This sounds more complicated than it is, so let's get started with a quick Hello World example before we move on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an HTML template. So we're going to go to our templates folder, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to create a file called index.html. Now within this index file, this is where we're going to add our markup. So for now, we'll just add some very basic markup. Let's go h1 hello world, and we'll close the h1 tag. So we'll save that, and then we're going to move over to our view file. In our view file, we have our one hello world view from the previous video. What we're going to do is we'll keep this view, but instead of returning hello world the string, we're going to return the template, the index.html template that we just created. So to do this, first we're going to need to import a render function from the Flask module. So we're going to go up to our top import line, and we're going to import render template. Then we're going to go back down to our view. We're going to get rid of the hello world string, and we're going to use the render function to render our template HTML. So we'll go render template, and now we want to put in the template name, which is index.html. And you'll remember from the blueprint, we indicated the template folder as templates, and that's where our index file currently resides. So now we want to check and see if this is working. So we'll switch over to our shell, and I haven't started the server yet. So if you haven't started your, or rather activated your virtual environment, make sure you do that before we do anything else. And now we're going to start our Flask server. So we'll go Flask run, just the usual. I want to bind it externally. Okay, we got it running. So now we want to switch over to our Chrome tab. We want to check that hello world. There we go. Okay, so it's definitely working, and you can see it looks like it's an h1 tag. We'll double check with the browser. Yeah, you can see it's an h1 tag, so our template is rendering. So this is a good example of rendering a template, but it doesn't really highlight the advantages that you gain from using a templating language. So what we'll do is we'll use a template variable to illustrate that. So we'll switch over to our code, and then we're going to go to our render template function call, and we're going to add a named parameter. We're going to call it, let's call it world, and it'll be equal to world. And then we're going to go over to our index.html, and we're going to remove world, and we're going to replace it with the template variable. So we'll make two curly braces, and then we want to output world. So we'll save that, and then we'll switch over to our Chrome tab, and we'll refresh it, and you'll see that the template variable didn't render properly. This is because we made changes to our server-side code in our view, but we didn't restart our Flask server. So what we'll do is we'll switch over to our shell, and then we'll stop our server with Control-C. I'm just going to clear this for now. And now we're going to set an environment variable called Flask_debug. And what this environment variable does is it tells Flask that we're working in a development process, in a debug process, and that when we make changes to our view, they should be reloaded, which means that we don't need to make changes, or rather after we make changes, we don't need to restart our server every time. So we'll use the same command as before. We'll go echo export Flask underscore debug, and we'll set that to 1. And then we'll go double arrows, and we want to append that to our reminders bin activate file. And then we're going to reactivate our file. There we go, and we'll echo it out just to make sure it's there. Okay, there we go. So then we'll start our Flask server. So Flask run, and then bind it externally. And you can see debug mode is on. So then we'll switch over to our browser tab, and we'll refresh to see if it's working. And there you go. You can see the hello world with the 2 exclamations that we used in our template variable is being rendered server side as HTML and is being returned to the user to be rendered on the browser. Another really cool perk that you get for using Jinja templates is that you get what's called template inheritance, which means templates can inherit other templates, and that allows you to reuse templates across your application. So that's what we'll do next. We'll create what's called a base template. A base template is going to outline the basics of our HTML, the components of the HTML that is going to be on all of our pages. And then within that template, we will render additional templates like our index.html template. So let's switch over to our code. And we want to create a new file in the template folder, and we'll call it base.html. Now inside this file, we're going to put our base HTML, which is the HTML that's going to be in all of our templates. I'm going to use a starter template that you can get from the Bootstrap website, and I'll just paste that in here, and we'll quickly go over what each of these are. So within your HTML tags, obviously you have your head tags. You should be somewhat familiar with HTML if you're doing this course. We have a link to the Bootstrap CSS framework, and we have a couple JS links down here, one for jQuery, one for Popper, and one for the Bootstrap JavaScript. Now, before we finish with our base template, we're going to we're going to create what's called a Jinja block. So we'll do some tags here, and then we'll go block content. And we'll do some closing tags, end block. So we'll save that. And what this is saying is when the block content is defined, output it here. So then we'll switch over to our index template. And now we need to inherit the base template. So we'll use some opening tags. Oops. And then we're going to go extends base.html. So that's just inheriting the base template. And then we're going to go down a line, open up some tags. And now we want to declare that we're adding content to the content block. So what we'll do is we'll go block content. And then we'll go under our h1 tags, and we'll open up some more, and we'll close it up with end block. And we'll save that. So now we'll switch over to our Chrome tab, and we'll refresh, and you can see hello world. So the base template is inherited, and if you look over here in our HTML viewer, you can see all the base template markup that we added is existing within our template now. So now that we've created a base template and we're inheriting that in our index template, let's create some very basic application markup structure. So first let's do a little bit of cleanup. We'll switch back over to our code, and we'll get rid of these old tags. We don't need them anymore. We'll get rid of this parameter. We don't need that anymore. Now you'll remember in our base template, we have been defining some Bootstrap dependencies, which means we now have access to the Bootstrap framework. And now's probably a good time to just kind of discuss Bootstrap briefly, just to kind of give you an idea of what it's used for. So I'll just switch over here to Chrome, and we'll take a look at the website briefly. So Bootstrap is a user interface framework Primarily, it's a CSS framework. It allows you to quickly create user interfaces, and is great for prototyping and just iterating quickly to get your ideas down and to get things looking just kind of baseline and looking really good right from the start. So we're going to lean on Bootstrap to kind of create the base interface for us for our application. So let's switch back over to our code. We'll go to the base file or base HTML file, and in here we're going to add some navigation for our application. So for now, let's just create a really basic navigation. We're not going to add anything too crazy to it. I lifted this example straight from the Bootstrap website and just pasted it in here. So what we'll do is we'll add this, and then we'll just go over to our Chrome tab, and we're going to refresh, and you can see it's already kind of taken the reins as far as laying this navigation bar out for us. So that was only three lines of markup, so you can see how powerful Bootstrap is and how quickly it allows you to move. So let's switch back over to our code, and we'll change out the nav stock word there, and we'll change it to SMS Reminders, because that's going to be the name of our application. And then we'll switch back over, double check that it worked. There we go, SMS Reminders. Okay, so now we have our navigation set up. We can add links to this, we can add our sign in, sign out, that sort of thing. So let's go back to our code, and then we want to set the anchor href to our root directory, so that way if anybody clicks on the SMS Reminders logo, it just brings them back to the main index page of the website. So next, let's create some layout for our application. Our application is really only going to be doing two things. That is creating SMS reminders and viewing SMS reminders. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a 2-column layout using the Bootstrap grid. So first we'll go over within our index HTML file, and we'll define a couple divs. So we'll go div, and we'll add a class row, which is just obviously defining a row from Bootstrap. Now within this row, you can create columns. So we'll create 2 columns. We'll go col med md. Now Bootstrap grid is 12 columns wide. So what we want to do is decide how much of each of that grid we want our 2 columns to contain. So I know from kind of creating the application that we're going to need a larger table to show our SMS reminders, and the other side of that is a form, which is a little bit smaller. So on the left side, we'll put our form, and we'll make it 4 out of 12 columns. So we'll go like this, close that div up, and then we'll create another column. So if there's 12 columns and we've used 4, that means there's 8 remaining. So the 8 remaining columns will attribute to the second column. There we go. So the second column is where we'll have our table, and this first column is where we'll have our form. So let's get an idea of how this looks. We'll add some text. This is where the form goes. And then down here we'll say, this is where the table goes. We'll save that. We'll switch over to our browser, and you can see it's created 2 columns, one for the form, one for the table. Now this is stretching across of the whole page, so you can see even if I get rid of this, it'll go for basically the entire page, which is not quite what we want. So what we're going to do is we'll switch over to our code, and we want to wrap this row in some type of container. So I think I would like to have the application kind of centered in the middle of the screen. So what we'll use is just a basic container or Bootstrap container. So we'll go div class container, and then we'll scoot these over a little bit, and then we'll close that div, save that, Switch over to Chrome, and you can see, there we go, that it kind of centered it. Now, if we wanted to, we could also put our navigation within this container. For now, we'll just leave it as is. So the last thing that I want to do for this lesson is create what's called a Flash handler. Flash messages are something that you use within your views to inform users that something has happened, something has changed, something either was successful or an error, that type of thing. So let's switch over to our code and then we'll add that. So we'll go over to our base HTML template, and after our navigation but before our content block, I'm going to create a container. We're going to create another row. And then within our row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste some Jinja markup, and then I'll explain what it does. So here's the markup. What we're basically doing here is some handling for the Flash messages. So I'll just go line by line and we'll kind of discuss how it works. So this is a with function or with declaration. So basically what that's saying is with this variable equal to this variable, and then within that context of this with tag, that variable will be set to this function value. So the next line is if we have any messages. So if this messages variable has anything in it, go ahead within these tags, and then within these tags you're going to say for each category and message in the messages variable, do this, and then we're going to say if the category is equal to message, we want to set a variable called category equal to info, and then we're just outputting the Flash message. So it's kind of long-winded, but what it really means is get the Flash message, check the category. If the category is equal to message, then set it to info, and then output the message. And you'll see here that we're using the category name in the classes for the markup. So this will change the way that the message ends up appearing in the interface based off of the type of category. So if you output a Flash message that is a success message, it'll be alert-success. And then Bootstrap has the class alert-success, which will make it look green. So what we'll do is we'll use an example. So we'll save this, and then we'll switch over to our views. And what we'll do is we'll render a Flash message, and that'll give us a better idea of how that markup works. So we need to import the Flash handler from Flask. So we'll go import Flash. There we go. And then we want to go to our view, and we want to call that that function that we just imported. So we'll go Flash, and we want to go hello world, because why not? We've been using it this whole time. And then we want to define the type of Flash message that we're declaring. So in this particular instance, we'll say success. It could be info, it could be warning, could be, I believe, danger or error, but let's use success for now. So then we'll switch over to our browser, go to Chrome, and then we'll hit refresh, and you can see the Flash message is there. So like I said, it's kind of a long-winded script, but basically what it's saying is, get the message if it's there, check the category, and then it coerces the category to info if it needs to be coerced to info. Otherwise, it just uses the category to kind of render out the class name, and the class defines the way that it looks. So you can see it's green, it's got the success, and if we just take a look in our developer tools, you can see down here Bootstrap has all these predetermined classes that add a little bit of color and just make things look kind of nice. And there's also a dismissible button so that our users can get rid of them once they've read the message. Now before we finish, I should go in and create a Git commit for our progress so far. So I'll switch back over to our shell, and then I'm going to go git status, and you can see our views and our templates has changed. So we'll go git add app/views because we know we want to add our views file, and then I believe we also want to add our app templates. And there you go. If we go, oops, there we go. Git status. So we are adding our views file, we're adding our index file, and we're adding our base template file. So then I'll go git commit, and we'll set a message. We'll say setting up templates and layout. And there we go. So I think we'll call it there. We learned a lot of different things in this lesson. We touched on Jinja templates, rendering those templates in our views. We added Flash handlers. We integrated Bootstrap. We learned a little bit about Bootstrap grids and how to use them. And we set up the basic layout of our application. In the next lesson, we'll create our first model using SQL Alchemy.